My name is Kira Devereaux, or at least that was my name. I'm 32 years old now, and for 5 of those years, that name was nothing but a number on a prison uniform. My own family, the powerful and respected Devereaux, put me there to cover up a devastating crime my brother committed. They stripped me of my future, my reputation, and my freedom, leaving me to rot while they preserved their perfect public image. They thought they had buried me and the truth so deep that no light could ever reach us. But they never counted on the one person from my past who remembered what loyalty really meant, a ghost from a childhood they had long since forgotten. They never imagined that the little girl I once protected would grow up to be the very detective who would tear their world apart. Before I dive into how a single act of playground courage from my childhood became the key to my vindication, I want to connect with all of you listening. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. It's incredible to see how far these stories can travel. And if you've ever felt betrayed or underestimated by the very people who were supposed to protect you, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For anyone new here, make sure you subscribe to join this community of survivors and storytellers. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the day the gates opened and I walked out into a world that no longer had a place for me. The air on the outside tasted metallic and thin, a poor substitute for the stale, recycled air of the correctional facility I'd called home for 1,825 days. Freedom didn't feel like a soaring release. It felt like a silent, crushing pressure. The sky was too big, the sounds of traffic too sharp, the colors of the world too vivid for eyes accustomed to gray concrete and faded blue uniforms. I stood on the sidewalk with a flimsy cardboard box containing my only possessions, a few paperback books, a stack of letters I never sent, and the clothes I was arrested in, now worn and strangely foreign. I had $20 from the prison gate fund, a bus ticket to the city, and a name that was now synonymous with disgrace. I was a convicted felon, a cautionary tale, the black sheep of the Devereaux dynasty, officially and irrevocably excised. My first destination was not a home, but a place that simply tolerated my existence, a halfway house on the grimier side of town. The building smelled of bleach and despair. My room was a small, cinder block cube with a cot, a dented metal locker, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. My roommate, a woman named Maria who was fighting to get her kids back from foster care, gave me a single piece of advice on my first night. "Keep your head down," she'd said, not looking up from the letter she was writing. "This world doesn't like second chances. It just likes to remind you that you blew the first one." She was right. The world outside prison was just a larger, more elegantly decorated cage. Every job application felt like a confession. The box you had to check, "Have you ever been convicted of a felony?" was not a question, it was a verdict. I applied for jobs as a dishwasher, a stock clerk, a janitor. In one interview for a position at a dingy diner, the manager, a man with a sweat-stained collar, looked at my application and then at me. He had the nerve to pull out his phone and Google my name right there. His eyes widened as the headlines from 5 years ago filled his screen. Devereaux heiress convicted in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. He looked at my worn-out jeans and the haunted look in my eyes. "Heiress," he scoffed, sliding my application into the trash can beside his desk. "Right. The position has been filled." He didn't even have the decency to lie well. I walked out of that diner with his pity and disgust clinging to me like a shroud. My attempts to contact my family were pathetic. I see that now. I used a payphone to call the family estate, the sprawling mansion where I grew up. The first few times, the housekeeper would just hang up. Finally, I got my father's personal assistant on the line, a woman named Cynthia who had known me since I was a child. Her voice was cold, professional. "The Devereaux family has no comment," she said, as if I were a reporter. "Kira," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's me. Please." There was a pause, a rustle of papers. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "Mr. Devereaux's instructions are clear. You are not to contact this household. Any further attempts will be dealt with." The line went dead. Dealt with. That was the language my father, Alistair Devereaux, used for inconvenient problems. I was an inconvenient problem. My mother, Genevieve, visited me once in prison, about a year into my sentence. She wore a Chanel suit and looked deeply uncomfortable in the visitor's room, as if the poverty and grief were contagious. She didn't hug me. She sat across the table, wringing her hands, her diamonds catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Your father is very disappointed, Kira," she'd said, as if I'd gotten a bad report card. "This whole affair has been terribly stressful for the family." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Stressful?" I'd asked. "I'm in here, Mom. I'm living in a cage." She had the audacity to look pained. "We all have to make sacrifices for the family," she whispered, leaning forward. "Tristan is so sensitive. A scandal of this magnitude would have destroyed him. You've always been the strong one. Be strong for us." She was asking me to carry the cross for my brother, the golden child, the heir apparent. I remember looking at her perfectly manicured hands, her flawless makeup, and feeling a kind of cold detachment I'd never known. She wasn't my mother. She was a spokeswoman for the man who had orchestrated my ruin. I thought about that visit often in the halfway house. I thought about the trial. The memory was a film reel I couldn't stop playing. My father, Alistair, sitting in the front row, his face a mask of stern disappointment, a performance for the press. My brother, Tristan, looking pale and pathetic, unable to meet my eyes. My mother dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. They had promised me the best lawyers. They had told me it would be a slap on the wrist, a minor sentence that would be expunged. A misunderstanding, my father had called it. The lawyer they hired was a man who owed my father a favor. His defense was limp, theatrical, designed to fail. He painted me as a disgruntled, reckless young woman who got in over her head. The prosecutor, armed with digital evidence that was too clean, too perfect, tore me apart. The evidence showed the fraudulent trades originating from my terminal, my access codes. It was a digital frame job, airtight and elegant in its cruelty. The moment the jury foreman said, "Guilty," I looked at my family. My father gave a slow, deliberate nod, not to me, but to his lawyer. It was a signal. Job done. The problem had been dealt with. The family was safe, and I was gone. My days settled into a bleak routine. Wake up. Search for jobs online at the public library. Get rejected. Eat a meager dinner at the shelter. Sleep. Repeat. Hope was a dangerous currency I couldn't afford. But one rainy afternoon, huddled over a flickering library computer screen, I saw it. It was a small article buried on page 7 of the city's financial news website. The headline was unassuming. Procedural questions lead to reopening of Devereaux fraud case. My breath caught in my throat. I read the short paragraph 3 times. An anonymous tip had been sent to the district attorney's office, raising concerns about the handling of the original investigation 5 years ago. The case was being officially reopened and assigned to a new lead detective from the Major Crimes Division. A spark ignited in the cold, dead place in my chest. It was a terrifying, brilliant spark of hope. But it was immediately followed by a wave of fear. Who sent the tip? Why now? I had no power, no resources, no one on my side. This was just another thing happening to me. A wave that could either lift me up or pull me back under for good. I felt like a pawn on a chessboard, watching a hand I couldn't see move the pieces. A few days later, there was a knock on the door of my room at the halfway house. It was a sharp, official-sounding knock. My heart hammered against my ribs. Cops. It was always cops. I opened the door a crack, expecting to see a uniformed officer with a warrant or a parole violation. Instead, a woman stood there, dressed in a simple, professional pantsuit. She was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked to be about my age. "Kira Devereaux," she asked, her voice calm and even. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "My name is Detective Elena Riley," she said, holding up her badge. "I'm with the Homicide and Major Crimes Division. I'm the new lead on your case. May I come in?" I let her in, my mind racing. She was the one, the new detective. The room seemed to shrink with her presence. She scanned the tiny space, the cot, the locker, the sad little window, and her professional mask flickered for just a second. I saw a hint of something in her eyes, something that wasn't pity, but a kind of pained recognition. She sat on the room's only chair while I perched on the edge of my cot. She asked me the standard questions first, confirming my identity, my address, my parole conditions. I answered in monosyllables, my guard up so high it was a physical wall between us. I trusted no one, especially not someone with a badge. She finished her initial questions, and then there was a long silence. She just looked at me, her gaze intense. You really don't remember me, do you? She said finally, her voice softer now. I shook my head, confused. We grew up in the same neighborhood. Northwood. I was a few grades below you. A scrawny kid with glasses too big for her face. My mind fumbled through the hazy memories of childhood, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The playground behind the elementary school, she continued, her eyes locked on mine. There was a group of sixth graders, the Jensen brothers. They used to corner me, try to take my lunch money. The memory surfaced, fuzzy at first, then sharp and clear. A little girl with pigtails and thick glasses, crying, backed up against the chain-link fence. 3 older boys, laughing, taunting her. They wanted my dad's watch, Detective Riley said, her voice quiet. He had just passed away, and it was the only thing I had of his. I remembered the anger that had flared in my chest, a fierce, protective fire that I didn't know I possessed. I was small for my age, but I had marched right up to them. I remembered getting between them and the little girl. I remembered yelling at them to leave her alone. One of the brothers, the biggest one, had shoved me. I shoved back. He punched me right in the eye. I remembered the shock of the pain, the stars that exploded behind my eyelids, but I also remembered screaming as loud as my lungs would allow until a teacher on yard duty came running. The boys scattered. The little girl was safe. Her watch was safe. Detective Elena Riley slowly, deliberately, pulled back the cuff of her sleeve. There, on her wrist, was a simple, classic silver watch, its leather band worn with age. You took a black eye for a girl you didn't even know, she said, her professional demeanor gone, replaced by a raw, profound sincerity. You did that for me, Kira. I never, ever forgot. For the first time in 5 years, a genuine, human warmth touched the frozen core of my being. The wall I had built around myself crumbled. The tears I had refused to shed, the grief I had swallowed, the despair I had choked down, it all came rushing up. A sob escaped my lips, a ragged, ugly sound. I covered my face with my hands as my body shook with the force of it. It was the first act of true kindness, the first acknowledgement of the person I used to be, that I had received since the day my family turned their backs on me. Riley waited patiently until the storm passed. She didn't offer platitudes or awkward pats on the back. She just gave me the space to break. When I finally looked up, wiping my eyes, she was looking at the cheap, standard issue case file on her lap. When this case landed on my desk, I requested it personally, she said, her voice now a low, determined hum. And I'm telling you, off the record, this whole file stinks to high heaven. The evidence is too neat. The original investigation was closed in record time. Your motive, as outlined by the prosecution, was nonsensical for someone with your history. They needed a fast, clean conviction, and they got one. They needed a scapegoat. She looked at me, her eyes hard as steel. I believe you're innocent, Kira, and I'm going to prove it. She handed me a small, anonymous-looking burner phone. Don't use your old number. Don't contact anyone. Stay low. Let me do my job. I'll find the loose threads. They always leave one. I'll be in touch. She stood up to leave, then paused at the door. That day on the playground, she said, you were the only person who was ever brave for me. Now it's my turn to be brave for you. The burner phone became my lifeline. For the first 2 weeks, it remained silent. I continued my miserable routine, but now it was underscored by a fragile, terrifying hum of anticipation. Every footstep in the hallway of the halfway house made me jump. Every siren in the distance made my stomach clench. I was living on a knife's edge between hope and the familiar dread that this, too, was a false promise. Then late one night it buzzed. An unknown number. It's me. Riley's voice said, low and urgent. Meet me at the corner of Elm and 4th in 20 minutes. Come alone. The corner was a dark, nondescript spot under a flickering street lamp. Riley pulled up in an unmarked sedan, and I slipped into the passenger seat. The car smelled of coffee and paperwork. I started with the original lead detective, she began, not wasting any time. A guy named Frank Henderson. He took early retirement a year after your case closed. Moved to Florida. Paid for his condo in cash. Very convenient. My heart pounded. I ran a background check on him. Turns out he and your father were members of the same exclusive golf club for years. They weren't just acquaintances. Of course, my father's web was intricate and far-reaching. Henderson is stonewalling, Riley continued, her fingers drumming on the steering wheel. He won't talk. So I moved on to the company, Devereaux and Sons Capital. Just hearing the name made my stomach turn. Most of the old employees from your time, there have signed ironclad NDAs. They're terrified of your father. But I found one who slipped through the cracks. An IT administrator named Martin Gable. He was let go about a month after your arrest. He runs a small computer repair shop out in the suburbs now. Riley had spent the better part of a week trying to find him, navigating a maze of dead ends and unlisted numbers. When she finally tracked him down to his dusty little shop, he was terrified. He tried to deny he ever worked for the Devereaux, but Riley was persistent. She showed him a picture of me from before the arrest, a smiling girl at a company picnic. She told him about my sentence. She told him about the look in my eyes. She broke him down. He finally agreed to talk, Riley said, turning to look at me in the dim light of the car. Anonymously for now. He said that on the night of the fraudulent transfers, Alistair Devereaux personally came to the server room. He ordered Martin to isolate your terminal's activity logs and create a new partition directory. He then had him manipulate the timestamp protocols and reroute the transaction data from another source to make it look like it originated from your login credentials. It was a sophisticated digital cut-and-paste job. Martin said he was horrified, but your father implied that if he didn't comply, he wouldn't just lose his job. He'd be implicated himself. I listened, my body cold with a mixture of vindication and horror. It was real. The proof was real. The next month, Riley said, her voice grim, Martin was laid off with a severance package of $200,000. Hush money. He used it to pay for his daughter's experimental cancer treatment. He's been living with the guilt ever since. It was the first concrete piece of evidence we had, the first thread in the web of lies. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The truth wasn't just a feeling in my gut anymore. It had a name, a time, and a place. It had a witness. But the Devereaux web had feelers everywhere. 2 days later, the burner phone rang again. This time, the number was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. Kira. The voice was unmistakable. It was my father. The sound of it, so calm and commanding, sent a chill down my spine. I don't know what game you're playing, Alistair said, his tone devoid of any warmth, any fatherly affection. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a hostile corporate takeover. And I don't know who you've been talking to, but it needs to stop. Now, you made a commitment to this family. We had an arrangement. The audacity of his words, twisting my sacrifice into a business deal, ignited a rage in me that had been dormant for years. I didn't have an arrangement, I said, my voice shaking but clear. You had me sentenced to protect your reputation and your guilty son. That's not family. That's a betrayal. There was a sharp intake of breath on his end. You are treading on very dangerous ground, he hissed. End this. The line went dead. The next call came an hour later. It was my mother. Her approach was different, a velvet glove hiding an iron fist of manipulation. Kira, darling, she cooed, her voice thick with fake concern. Your father is so worried. This business with the police, it's dredging up such awful memories. Think of what this will do to us, to the family name. Think of Tristan. His nerves are completely shot. He's barely sleeping. I listened in silence, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. She was still protecting him. Even now. After everything we did for you, she continued, her voice beginning to fray at the edges, the best schools, the opportunities. Is this how you repay us? By trying to tear us all down. I almost hung up. I almost screamed at her. But some part of me, some damaged, hopeful part, still wanted to hear a single word of remorse. It never came. I have to go, Genevieve, I said, using her first name. The coldness in my own voice surprised me. I ended the call before she could respond. The conversation left me feeling hollowed out, the old poison seeping back into my veins. My brother, Tristan, chose a more direct approach. He found me. I was at the library, my one safe space, trying to research legal precedents for overturned convictions. He cornered me between the stacks of law books. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of stale whiskey. What do you want, Kira? He snarled, his voice a low, vicious whisper. Is it money? Is that it? Dad will pay you. Just name your price and make this go away. He was treating me like a blackmailer. The boy I once helped with his homework, the brother I had adored, was looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I don't want your money, Tristan, I said, my voice steady. I want my life back. The one you and Dad stole from me. He took a step closer, his face contorted in a sneer. You got what you deserved, he spat. You were always a bleeding heart, a weak link. Dad knew it. You were a worthless asset, so he cut his losses. That's all this was. The cruelty of his words was so profound, it was almost clarifying. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak, pathetic boy who had been told his entire life that he was a prince. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a deep, chilling pity. You're right, I said softly. I was a weak link. But prisons have a way of forging new kinds of strength. I walked away, leaving him standing there, his fists clenched, his face a mask of impotent rage. The confrontation with my family was a prelude to the disaster that followed. Riley called me for another late-night meeting, but this time, her energy was different. The determined fire in her eyes had been dampened. It's Gable, she said, her voice flat. He's recanted. I stared at her. What? What do you mean? I mean your father got to him, she said, slamming her hand lightly on the dashboard. Alistair's lawyers paid him a visit yesterday. They reminded him of the NDAs, of the legal consequences of perjury. They probably offered him more money, or threatened his family. I don't know. But he called the DA's office this morning and said he was mistaken in his memories, that he was under duress when he spoke to me. Our witness is gone, Kira. He's evaporated. The spark of hope that had sustained me for weeks was extinguished. The world tilted, the familiar feeling of the walls closing and returning with a vengeance. My captain read me the riot act this morning, Riley continued, her voice laced with frustration. He accused me of having a personal vendetta, of harassing a prominent family based on a flimsy, now recanted tip. He's threatening to pull me off the case, to close it again. She looked utterly defeated. They're too powerful, Kira. Their money, their influence, it's a fortress. They've covered every track, silenced every voice. I don't see a way in. Seeing her, my one ally, my one beacon of hope, so close to giving up, did something to me. The fear was still there, but something else rose to meet it, a cold, hard resolve. I had spent 5 years being a passive victim of my family's machinations. I had let them write my story. No more. The original detective, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Henderson, you said he was close to my father. You said he retired on a pile of cash right after my conviction. Riley looked at me, a question in her eyes. My father is a meticulous man, I went on, the pieces clicking into place in my mind. He's also arrogant. He would never trust a loose end like Martin Gable completely. He would need insurance, a guarantee. What if the real proof, the smoking gun, isn't buried in some corporate server? What if my father gave it to Henderson? A little piece of leverage to ensure his silence was permanent. Riley's eyes slowly widened as she followed my logic. A break glass in case of emergency file, she breathed. Something Henderson could use to protect himself if your father ever tried to cut him loose. It was a long shot, a wild guess born of desperation. But it was the only move we had left. The game wasn't about finding a thread to pull anymore. It was about setting a trap. And I knew I had to be the bait. The plan was terrifyingly simple. We needed to make my father and brother believe they had won, that I was broken and crawling back to them. We needed to get them into a public space, feeling safe and superior, and we needed to get Henderson there at the same time to spook them into making a mistake. The first step was the hardest. I took the last of the money I had, a few $100s I'd scraped together from odd, under-the-table cleaning jobs, and went to a second-hand consignment shop. I bought a simple, elegant dress, one that looked expensive but subdued. It was a costume, the uniform of the prodigal daughter returning to the fold. Then I made the call. I dialed my mother's personal cell phone. I pitched my voice to sound shaky, defeated. I cried. I told her I couldn't take it anymore. The rejections, the poverty, the loneliness. I told her my father was right, that I had been foolish to stir things up. I'll do whatever you want, I sobbed into the phone. I'll sign a statement. I'll go to the press and reaffirm my guilt. I'll do anything. I can't live like this anymore. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear her whispering to my father in the background. She came back on the line, her voice dripping with triumphant sympathy. Oh, Kira, darling, I need sense. We just want what's best for you. I want to do it face to face, I said, my voice catching on a fabricated sob. I want to see you all. One last time. Like a family. We can meet at Lucille, I suggested, naming their favorite, ridiculously overpriced restaurant, a place where they felt powerful, untouchable. You can bring the papers and a check for a resettlement fund, so I can disappear and start over somewhere else. It was the perfect bait. The offer of my silence in exchange for money was a language they understood perfectly. Of course, dear, Genevieve said, her relief palpable. Of course. We'll be there. Friday night at 8. I hung up the phone, my body trembling not from fear, but from a strange, exhilarating adrenaline. The trap was set. Friday night. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of the halfway house bathroom. The dress fit well, with my hair pulled back and a touch of makeup I'd borrowed from Maria. I almost looked like the old Kira. But my eyes were different. They held a hardness that no dress could soften. Riley met me a block away from the restaurant. She handed me a tiny microphone, no bigger than a button, and helped me secure it to the inside of my dress. The team is in a surveillance van across the street, she said, her voice all business. We'll hear everything. I've also arranged a little surprise for your father. She gave me a grim smile. I made a call to our friend in Florida, Mr. Henderson. I used a voice modulator and posed as Alistair's assistant. I told him your father had an urgent, private matter to discuss regarding a mutual security arrangement, and that he needed to be at Lucille at 8:30 sharp. My breath hitched. He's coming. He's on a plane as we speak, Riley confirmed. He thinks he's coming to get more money from your dad. The fool is walking right into it. She squeezed my shoulder. You can do this, Kira. Just get Tristan to talk. That's all we need. I walked into Lucille, a lamb walking into a den of beautifully dressed wolves. The restaurant was a symphony of quiet wealth. Clinking crystal, hushed conversations, the scent of expensive perfume. My family was already there, seated at their usual corner booth. Alistair looked regal and smug, a king surveying his domain. Genevieve was fluttering with nervous energy, fussing with her pearls. And Tristan was already half drunk, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked at my dress and gave a low, insulting whistle. They had the documents laid out on the table next to a thick cashier's check. It was for $50,000, the price of my life. I sat down, playing my part. I kept my eyes downcast, my hands trembling slightly. I'm glad you came to your senses, Alistair began, his voice condescending. This is for the best. You'll sign this non-disclosure agreement and a formal confession for the DA. In return, this check will allow you to relocate and build a new, quiet life. It's a generous offer. Genevieve chimed in, trying to create an illusion of family warmth. We were just reminiscing, darling, about that summer in the Hamptons. Do you remember? Before all this unpleasantness, her attempt at nostalgia was so pathetic, so transparently false that it almost made me laugh. I just nodded numbly. Tristan leaned forward, his breath sour with scotch. Took you long enough to remember your place, he sneered. 5 years in the gutter finally taught you who's in charge. I ignored him, my eyes fixed on the documents. I picked up the pen, my heart hammering against the tiny microphone. This was it, the moment of truth. I looked up from the papers, not at my father, but at my brother. My voice was just a whisper, laced with what I hoped sounded like broken despair. Before I sign, I said, I just have to know. Just for me. No one else ever has to hear it. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. Was it worth it? 5 years of my life, my future, everything. Was it worth it to save yourself? Alistair shot Tristan a warning look, but my brother was too arrogant, too drunk to care. He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. Worth it, he scoffed, leaning back in the booth, puffing out his chest. Of course it was worth it. Are you kidding me? You were a glorified secretary with a sob story, Kira. I am the future of Devereaux Capital. What happened was a simple business decision. A calculated loss to protect a much more valuable asset. His words, so callous and cruel, hung in the air. The confession, clear as a bell. At that exact moment, the front door of the restaurant opened. An older man in a rumpled suit walked in, looking around nervously. It was Frank Henderson. His eyes swept the room and landed on our booth. He saw Alistair, Genevieve, Tristan, and me. His face went white with shock and confusion. Alistair followed his gaze and saw Henderson. Pure, unadulterated panic flashed across my father's face. What is he doing here? He hissed, his composure finally shattering. The carefully constructed world of Alistair Devereaux began to crumble in that instant. And then, the final piece of the plan fell into place. 2 figures detached themselves from the shadows near the bar and began walking toward our table. It was Riley, her face set like stone, flanked by another detective in plain clothes. The patrons of the restaurant started to murmur, turning to watch the drama unfold. Riley stopped at our table, her eyes ignoring everyone but me for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement. Then she held up her badge. He's here on my invitation, she said, her voice ringing with authority in the suddenly silent restaurant. She turned her steely gaze to my brother. Tristan Devereaux, you're under arrest for multiple counts of securities fraud and conspiracy. Then she looked at my father, whose face had turned a pasty, ashen gray. Alistair Devereaux, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and bribery of a public official. Genevieve let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The entire restaurant was frozen, watching as Riley's partner cuffed a sputtering, disbelieving Tristan. The clink of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice, the sound of freedom. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The story exploded across the news, a salacious tale of high society betrayal that the media devoured. Devereaux dynasty in ruins, screamed the headlines. Tristan's drunken confession, captured perfectly on the wire, was an open and shut case. Faced with his own mountain of charges and the undeniable proof of his meeting with my father, Frank Henderson folded completely. He gave a full confession, detailing every sordid step of the conspiracy. The bribe, the falsified reports, the deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence. He laid it all at Alistair Devereaux's feet. Within weeks, the legal process that had once crushed me now worked to set me free. My conviction was formally and publicly overturned. I was officially exonerated. I remember walking out of the courthouse, not into a chaotic scrum of reporters as I had expected, but into a quiet, sun-drenched afternoon. The world seemed different, brighter. Riley was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps, leaning against her car. She wasn't wearing her detective suit, just jeans and a simple jacket. She smiled, a real unguarded smile. We didn't need words. We just stood there for a moment, sharing the silence, letting the reality of the victory wash over us. It was finally, truly over. A month later, I was living in a small, clean studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place I'd secured with the first installment of a substantial restitution settlement from the state. The anonymity was a luxury I savored. One evening, my new, untraceable phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. My mother. She was out on bail, the family's assets frozen pending the outcome of the trials. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its musical, condescending lilt. It was thin, reedy, and desperate. She wept. She told me Alistair was refusing to see her, blaming her for being weak, for letting me manipulate her. She said Tristan wouldn't speak to her. She begged me for forgiveness. Then she begged me for money. "You're all I have left, Kira," she cried, her voice cracking. "I'm your mother. Please, you have to help me." I listened to her, my own emotions strangely calm, strangely distant. The old Kira would have been torn apart by this, would have felt the pull of guilt and obligation. But that Kira had died in a prison cell. This was my first real test of the new person I had become. "You were my mother once," I said, my voice even and clear, devoid of anger or pity. But a mother doesn't sacrifice one child to save the other. A mother doesn't watch her daughter be led away in chains and call it a family sacrifice. I forgive you, Genevieve. I'm doing it for me, so I can finally let go of all the poison. But we are done. There is nothing left to say. I ended the call, my hand steady. It was the hardest and most necessary boundary I had ever set. It was a final, quiet act of liberation. A year can change everything. 1 year after my family's world imploded, my own was slowly, carefully being rebuilt. I didn't want the Devereaux money, the blood money that had been wrung from my father's dirty dealings. I used the state settlement to enroll in a paralegal program at the local community college. I wanted to understand the system that had both broken and saved me. My goal was to one day work for a place like the Innocence Project to help others who had been lost in the cracks of the justice system. My life was small, but it was mine. It was filled with quiet routines, classes, studying at the local library, weekend shifts at a cozy bookstore. My chosen family consisted of one person, Elena Riley. We had dinner once a week at a noisy little Italian restaurant, the kind of place my mother would have turned her nose up at. We'd laugh and talk for hours, two women who had found a strange, unbreakable bond in the wreckage of my past. She had saved my life, and in a way, I had given her a chance to pay forward a debt she never truly owed. We were family forged not by blood, but by loyalty. Looking back now, I can see the bitter irony in it all. My family, so obsessed with strength and status, was ultimately a house of cards, built on a foundation of weakness, fear, and moral compromise. They thought that by stripping me of my name, my money, and my freedom, they had taken everything of value. They were wrong. In that desolate prison cell, with nothing left to lose, I was forced to find the one thing they could never touch, my own intrinsic worth. The ultimate vindication wasn't watching them fall from grace. It was the quiet, steady process of my own ascent, built on my own terms. It was the peace I felt waking up in my own apartment, the satisfaction of earning my own grades, the simple joy of sharing a pizza with a true friend. They set a fire to burn me down, but they only succeeded in burning away the parts of me that were never really mine to begin with. My story is a painful one, but the most important lesson it taught me is this. Your value is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is not something that can be given to you by a parent or a partner, and it certainly isn't something they can ever take away. It is the core of who you are, and sometimes you have to lose everything to finally find it. I would love to hear from you now. Have you ever had to find your own strength after a profound betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the light that someone else needs to see in the dark. And of course, if this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and vindication. Sharing this video might help it find someone who needs to hear that they are not alone and that it is possible to rebuild from the ashes. Thank you so much for joining me today, for listening to my journey. I wish you all strength, peace, and the courage to know your own incredible worth.